Okay, picture this. It's 632 CE, only months after the death of Prophet Muhammad, and the Arabian Peninsula has descended into absolute political turmoil. We're talking fractured tribal alliances, rival leaders springing up to challenge Medina's authority, and the very survival of this young Islamic state literally hanging by a thread. In this explainer, we're diving into the Battle of Buzakha, a massive, decisive clash that would ultimately determine the future of the Middle East.
We're kicking off with this absolute line in the sand drawn by Caliph Abu Bakr. He took a zero-tolerance policy toward the rebellious tribes fracturing the peninsula. When delegations came to Medina offering to remain Muslim but absolutely refusing to pay the centralized zakat tax, Abu Bakr didn't flinch. He declared he would fight them even if they withheld just the rope of a camel. For him, withholding taxes wasn't just a financial dispute, it was an act of outright rebellion that had to be met with military force.
Which leads us to the ultimate question hanging over everything. Without the unifying, charismatic presence of its founder, could this young state actually survive an existential crisis? Would it splinter back into fiercely independent, warring nomadic tribes, or would it somehow consolidate into a unified regional powerhouse? Part 1. Arabia in Crisis. Let's look at this power vacuum.
When you look at the timeline, it is staggering how fast this all escalated. Within literally hours of the Prophet's passing on June 8th, a massive crisis of authority erupted. By mid-632, Abu Bakr was elected as the first caliph, but by late summer, the peninsula was on fire. These so-called Ridda Wars, or Wars of Apostasy, had officially ignited. You had peripheral Bedouin tribes who viewed their allegiance as a personal, temporary contract with the Prophet rather than a permanent submission to the state of Medina, and they just started breaking away.
Now, what's super fascinating here is that we can actually view the Ridda Wars through two completely different historical lenses. Early Islamic historical sources traditionally view these uprisings as a massive religious crisis, tribes abandoning the faith entirely to follow false prophets. But if you look at modern academic scholarship, they highlight a parallel political reality. This was a fierce fiscal and tribal rebellion. For these highly independent Bedouins, paying zakat to Medina felt like illegitimate tribute. So it really was a massive clash between centralized state authority and traditional nomadic independence.
Part 2. Rival Visions for Arabia. Let's meet our commanders.
Exploiting the power vacuum in the north, a chieftain named Tulayha ibn Khuwaylid stepped up and actually declared himself a prophet. According to early Islamic historians, he claimed to receive divine revelations, and he used his status as a skilled poet to reel in thousands of followers from his own Banu Asad tribe and their allies. He even went so far as to alter religious practices, reportedly abolishing the act of prostration and prayer. He did this specifically to appeal to the pride of his Bedouin warriors, basically telling them, hey, you shouldn't have to bend your backs for anyone.
So the sheer contrast between our two commanders here is just wild. On one side, representing Medina, Caliph Abu Bakr appointed Khalid ibn al-Walid. He's a brilliant tactician, leading a highly disciplined, centrally backed force of about 6,000 men. On the flip side, Tulayha commanded a massive force of roughly 15,000 men. But here's the catch. Tulayha's army was a super brittle tribal coalition. It was bound together by fragile alliances and promises of autonomy, not strict military discipline.
Part 3. The Battle of Buzakha, September 632.
Khalid's march to Buzakha was an absolute masterclass in ancient logistics and psychological warfare. He doesn't just march blindly into the desert. His pre-battle intelligence gathering was so good that he secured the secret defection of the Banu Tai tribe, taking his ranks from 4,000 up to 6,000 men. Then, he pushes his army through a brutal 150-mile desert trek in just 5 days. They arrived at the battlefield in northern Najd perfectly positioned to exploit the rebels, who were getting pretty overconfident.
And this moment right here is pure cinematic tension. As the two armies faced off on the vast plains of Buzakha, the Muslims issued the Adhan, the Islamic call to prayer, and across the battlefield, nothing. Total silence from the rebel coalition. That dramatic silence was the undeniable, official signal that they completely rejected Medina's authority. And honestly, it was the exact spark that initiated Khalid's relentless frontal assault.
The battle itself was initially incredibly fierce. Khalid launched disciplined wave-after-wave infantry charges, but the tribal archers actually held their ground for a bit. But then we hit the psychological breaking point. Under immense pressure, the rebel field commander, Uyayna, basically begs Tulayha for some kind of divine intervention. And Tulayha, wrapped up in a cloak, responds with cryptic, completely useless rhyming poetry. Realizing this so-called prophet had literally no real answers in the heat of combat, Uyayna shouted to his men to retreat. The illusion of divine backing totally shattered, massive panic set in, and Tulayha himself just fled the field. 20. That is the staggering number of miles the shattered remnants of the rebel coalition were routed. They were chased relentlessly toward Gamra. In a single devastating afternoon, Khalid's cavalry completely erased their military threat to Medina.
Part 4. Strategy and Historical Sources. Let's deconstruct the anatomy of this victory.
So how did he do it? Khalid's overarching military doctrine, which we're exploring here, would become an absolute hallmark of the early Islamic conquests. He always fought close to the desert boundary. By keeping the deep desert right at his back, he ensured his forces had a secure haven that his enemies couldn't easily navigate, while simultaneously maintaining superior mobility for his cavalry. It's brilliant.
When you break it down, the anatomy of this victory wasn't about numbers at all. It was highly disciplined infantry tactics, slicing through loose tribal formations. But more importantly, Khalid masterfully exploited the deep-seated disunity of his enemies. By using intelligence to flip the Banu Tai tribe, and by relentlessly targeting the ideological figurehead, Tulayha, Khalid used psychological warfare just as effectively as physical force. He completely dismantled the myth of his enemy's invincibility.
Now, a quick note on how we actually know all this. Details of this campaign survive through the incredible compilations of early Islamic historians like al-Tabari, al-Waqidi, and Ibn al-Asir. They painstakingly blended generations of oral traditions into textual records. And sure, while modern scholars might debate the exact casualty numbers or troop sizes from these 7th century texts, the sources uniformly agree on the timeline, the shifting tribal loyalties, and the massive strategic outcome of this campaign.
Part 5. The Legacy of Buzakha. So why does all of this matter today?
Well, the dominoes fell fast in the immediate aftermath. The largest northern rebel coalition permanently dissolved. Defeated tribes were forced to the table to negotiate surrender and, yes, resume those zakat payments. Crucially, this secured the Caliphate's northern flank, which then allowed Khalid's army to advance southward to face an even deadlier rival prophet, Musaylama, at the Battle of Yamama.
Buzakha completely validated Abu Bakr's refusal to compromise. It proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the Islamic State wasn't just a temporary phenomenon tied to the life of its founder. It could survive its infancy, it could suppress massive internal rebellion, and it could transition from a fragile religious community into a highly centralized regional power.
But history always throws a curveball, right? After fleeing Buzakha in disgrace, the defeated leader Tulayha eventually reconciled with the Caliphate. He publicly repented, returned to Islam, and actually went on to serve as a highly celebrated warrior in the Muslim conquests of the Sassanid Persian Empire. The very man who tried to destroy the state ended up fighting to expand it. It's a real game changer.
And that leaves us with a pretty wild thought to end on. How did the incredibly fluid, complex, shifting tribal allegiances of a defeated rebel eventually help build the very empire he tried to destroy? It just goes to show how dynamic and totally unpredictable 7th century Arabian politics truly were. The Battle of Buzakha wasn't just the end to a rebellion. It was the crucible that forged the armies that would soon march out of the desert and change the world forever.